when I spoke to Venerable Vimala, she suggested that we do a little bit of meditation first of all. Is that right, Paula? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll do a bit of meditation first of all, and then we move on to the talk and the and maybe some Q&A afterwards. So let's just might as well just get into it. So yeah, so sit back, find yourself a nice and comfortable position, a good posture, and just close your eyes. And of course, as you close your eyes, you can feel the body really well. You can feel if you have any tensions or any problems or any pains or any issues or whatever it might be. And the beginning of meditation is always just about relaxing and allowing things to be. One of the fundamental ideas about meditation practice is the idea of letting go. And letting go basically means that we stop using so much willpower. We don't do so much. We allow things to be. And one of the ways that this comes out in meditation is just relaxing. If you are tense, if you're not relaxed, usually it's the sense that you haven't let go. You're holding on. You're trying to do. You are controlling, or whatever it might be. So start out by relaxing. And this ability to relax is actually itself an exercise in letting go. And a big part in the process of letting go is to allow the world just to be, to leave the world behind, not to think about the past and the future or whatever events are going on in the world. And to be able to do that is so important to enjoy the meditation practice. And so make sure that you always enjoy the meditation. Look for the positive signs. Look for the beautiful quiet it is just to sit down by yourself. Feel the pleasure of that quietness. Feel the pleasure of not having any burdens in your life, anything you have to do right now. All of these positive things that comes by just sitting down, closing your eyes. If you get it the right way, it is a very positive experience. And it's an experience that is not only positive when you start out. Actually, initially, it may not be so positive, but as you deepen it, it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, becoming more and more positive. So make sure that you note the positiveness. And if it doesn't feel positive, then see how you can recalibrate or how you can watch or experience the meditation in a slightly different way. Focus on different aspects. See the goodness of meditation. And as you do so, the letting go becomes more easy. And if you find yourself drifting off, thinking about the world or thinking about the past or whatever, then just remind yourself that there's nothing really interesting in the world. world is just more of the same. The world is more going round and round. There is no real solution in the world. The solution is found on the spiritual path. It is the meditation that is interesting. This is where the real things actually happen. It's about understanding what is truly interesting in life, what truly gets you somewhere. Let go of all the silliness. Let go of the world. Let go of all the other things in your life that are not so important as the spiritual practice is. path of meditation is always very gradual. The degree of stillness and clarity you have arises very gradually and slowly. So one of the core ideas of meditation is the idea of patience, just waiting for things to settle down. What you will find as you wait, if you wait in the right kind of way, is that the clarity starts to arise. And there will come a point when maybe you are ready to kind of follow a real meditation object, where the breath comes into view, or you want to do the metta meditation or whatever. So you need to kind of be aware of when the mind is ready. And then when the mind is ready, you turn your attention very gently towards a meditation object, following the breath, doing the metta, doing some other kind of contemplation, whatever it might be, and allow the mind to settle down softly, gently, delightfully, together with that meditation object. Okay, so coming close to the end of the meditation, just take a few moments towards the end just to review your experience today. And as always, the critical thing to focus on when you review the meditation is to ask yourself how it works and to understand the mechanism, the intention, the perceptions that underlie the meditation practice. And this way, you can become your own little master of meditation. Okay, everyone, so please come out and we will move on to the Dhamma Talk. Okay, everyone, so again, nice to see you all. And I also see my compatriot over there, Helen, is also here. That's wonderful. Hello, Helen. Nice to see you. So, yeah, I'm actually half Australian now, because I got a dual nationality, so I'm kind of a bit of a mixed bag. But anyway, I originally from Norway. That's true. So anyway, great to be with you all. And I, uh, I have a long, as I mentioned before, quite a long friendship with Venerable Vimala. I've known her for, I don't know, 10 years at least, probably. So it goes a long way back. And so it's very nice to be able to be with you all because I think all of you you originate probably from your relationship with Venerable Vimala, and some of you maybe also from your relationship with the Buddhist Society over here. So it's marvelous to be with you. So I asked for some suggestions for the talk today when I spoke to, I think, Karina. I'm not sure if is Karina here. I'm not sure if she's here, but anyway. So and there was a number of suggestions, and as always, I'm going to not as always, but as sometimes I do, I'm going to talk about some of those topics just a little bit in between. My main focus is going to be on the First Noble Truth. And the reason for that is because I've been talking about the First Noble Truth here at the monastery during the Rains retreat. So it's kind of in my mind. And it occurs to me that it is a very interesting teaching and also very powerful. And often we don't contemplate these basic foundational teachings of the Dhamma enough. There's so much to be gotten out of these teachings, so much to profound understanding, so much that is worthy of reflection. And so I like to focus sometimes on the very basic ideas of Buddhism, which is the Four Noble Truths, and specifically today, the First Noble Truth. So I hope you're not too disappointed with that because you all know it is about dukkha, and maybe you have enough dukkha already, and now we're going to have more dukkha. So I apologize. I don't mean to make your life more miserable, but remember that understanding dukkha in Buddhism is not about experiencing dukkha, it is actually about experiencing happiness. If you understand dukkha, if you understand suffering, if you understand the problems of life in the right kind of way, it actually leads to happiness. So when we talk about dukkha, it's about understanding it. It's not about experiencing it as such. And then that has actually some very, very positive consequences afterwards. And so one of what is very fascinating about the Four Noble Truths, and of course including the First Noble Truth, is that it is pretty much the first teaching the Buddha gave after his awakening. Yeah, I assume that you are all a little bit have a little bit of familiarity with the Buddha's progress, yeah, his awakening, and then afterwards his teaching to his five disciples and all of that. And the very first sutta that the Buddha gave, the very first discourse that he gave, is known in Pali as the Dhamma Pavattana Sutta, which means the discourse on setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. And this is where he starts out, and he talks about the middle way. And first of all, his five disciples, don't want to talk to him. Yeah, they're really upset with the Buddha because after the Buddha gave up his fasting, and after he gave up fasting, he took food. He ate food, and that was enough. for these five disciples to reject him. You have backslided, you have gone back to worldly pleasures. You are eating, for goodness sake. Eating is kind of was considered really bad. And so before that, I think the Buddha had kind of like two rice grains a day or something like that. And then he started taking some serious food. And so they rejected him, and so he had to kind of convince them to listen to the new message, and he was able to do that. And then he taught the middle way, and after teaching the middle way, he taught the Four Noble Truths. Yes, this is like the beginning of the Buddha's teaching. And I think there are a number of reasons why he starts out like this. And one of the reasons why he talks about the Dhamma in this way is simply because the Four Noble Truths are like an overview. The Four Noble Truths contain all the other teachings. All of the Dhamma is included within the Four Noble Truths. They are like a broad kind of a map of the Dhamma, and understanding that it means you start with an overview, and then you can kind of fill in all the details as you go along. You have like a skeleton, and then you add everything onto that skeleton afterwards. So this is kind of gives that broad-based understanding. And this is exactly what you find, of course, in the suttas. You find that in the greater sutta on the similarist foot, the greater sutta on the simile of the elephant's footprint, the Mahahatipadopama Sutta, which is found in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length sayings of the Buddha, number 28, if you wish to look it up. And in there, the Buddha says that the Four Noble Truths, they are like an elephant's footprint. Inside the elephant's footprint, all other footprints fit inside the elephant's footprint. And if you doubt me, just go to YouTube afterwards and check out the elephant's footprint. Yeah, this is the nice thing about YouTube. Very handy. You can check out elephant's footprint right there on YouTube. So it comes in really, really nicely. So all other footprints go inside the kind of large elephant's footprint. In the same way, all teachings fall within the Four Noble Truths. Yeah, when you consider how the Nikayas, how the suttas are divided and classified, that's exactly what we see. We see in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses of the Buddha. Yeah, this is one of the main collections of the Dhamma. The connected discourses, there you find the suttas on the five khandhas. Well, that's just talking about the first noble truth, dukkha, suffering, and the five aggregates. You find suttas on the six sense bases, and the suttas on the six sense bases are also part of dukkha. You find the suttas on dependent origination. Well, that's part of the arising of suffering. So all of these can be classified one way or another into the Four Noble Truths. This is like an overview. And as such, it is incredibly useful to contemplate what is going on. But what is also interesting about the Four Noble Truths is that they are not just an overview, but they are also like a fairly detailed exposition on how to understand the details of the Dhammas. It's kind of an extraordinary mix of overview and also a detailed understanding of what is going on. Yeah, this is kind of what makes it also quite special. And so what you find in the suttas is that understanding the Four Noble Truths is right view. Right view as at the very beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so if you want to have right view, a very important place to start is with an investigation of the Four Noble Truths. And if that is right view, then it is worthy of contemplation, right? It is worthy of reflection. Because right view is not something that arises straight away. Right view is something that develops over time. It takes time to really get an appreciation for and to grapple with these teachings. They are very profound. And so if you want to understand what suffering really means, you should actually contemplate the First Noble Truth, contemplate all the details of it. And as you start to understand those details, you start to understand what the idea of suffering or what the idea of dukkha really is about. Same thing with the arising of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, all of these things. So right view is a gradual thing here. Too often we think of right view as a kind of yes or no proposition. Do you believe in rebirth? Yes, okay, you got right view. No, sorry, you haven't got right view, or whatever. But it's not really like that. All of these things are ways of thinking about the world that develop over time. It takes a long time to align the way you think about the world with the way the Buddha thought about the world. We want to see things in the same kind of light, in the same kind of way. And then as you develop your view, then gradually those Four Noble Truths start to become a reality. Yeah, and eventually the very awakening itself to the Dhamma is an awakening to the Four Noble Truths. So you could argue that one way of thinking about the whole training, the whole Noble Eightfold Path, the whole gradual training, is as a gradual appreciation of the Four Noble Truths, becoming more and more profound as you understand it, as you cultivate it through meditation practice, as you cultivate it through all of these other ways of thinking about it. And so then slowly, these ideas of the Four Noble Truths and of dukkha specifically start to actually come out. And so let us contemplate a little bit on the First Noble Truth, what it may actually mean and what it does not mean. And one of the first things I want to mention very briefly is, well, when we talk about dukkha, yeah, often translated as suffering, sometimes translated as unsatisfactoriness. And the question is, well, what is the most satisfactory translation? Is unsatisfactoriness satisfactory, or is it not? Is suffering more satisfactory, or is it not? What is the right translation of the word dukkha? And this is actually quite important. Now, very often people will make arguments about the word dukkha from their experience of the world, and they say, "Oh, not everything is unsatisfactory." What about you have a nice meal and you are enjoying a walk in nature and you feel uplifted because you had a nice meditation? Surely all of that is not dukkha. It is perhaps unsatisfactory, but not really suffering, perhaps. But we have to be very careful, and we have to be careful because all of these things are about insight. It's about understanding the world in a new way. And even understanding dukkha, even understanding suffering, is not a matter of using our unenlightened perspective to understand what is going on. This understanding dukkha comes from insight. Because it comes from insight, it is the view of the Buddha that we're talking about when we talk about dukkha. Yeah, and so because it is that, we should not expect to be able to understand or translate dukkha just from our ordinary experience. It is something profound. It is something that you uncover as your meditation deepens and as you start to see the nature of reality yourself. That is actually where kind of these words really come to life and they actually gain a real meaning for you. And so this is very important to keep in mind. Now, when you start to look at the way that the First Noble Truth works, and I will look at that in a second, you start to understand that it is not just about experience in this life that the First Noble Truth is about. The First Noble Truth is about this broad vision of existence. The broad vision of existence in Buddhism is really about the idea of rebirth, the idea of the cycle of existence coming back again and again in various ways. And when you start to reflect on that and you start to reflect on how kind of coming back and again, it doesn't sound all that interesting. Yeah, after a while, you had enough of rebirths, you've done the same thing enough times. How many times do you want to go through the same kind of life? Yeah, I don't know about you, but I've had a pretty good life in many ways. But do I really want to do it again? Not really. I'm not so keen on doing everything again. And especially if you have to do it 1,000 times again, right? After a while, it gets very, very weary of having to go through these things so many times. And so from that perspective, when you stand back and you look at the larger reality that the Buddha is talking about, yeah, that is the idea of dukkha, and that is suffering. And suffering, therefore, is the right translation for the word dukkha, because that is what we're talking about in the First Noble Truth. And the First Noble Truth is kind of the most important way that the dukkha is explained and talked about in the suttas. And so dukkha is the right thing, but it's very important here not to get this the wrong way around. Sometimes people will say that, well, this means that Buddhists are very pessimistic because I know that there's happiness in the world, and all you guys talk about is dukkha all the time. What is wrong with you? Yeah, get a life, do something with yourself. And the answer is this, and this is kind of the point. Yes, there is a lot of happiness in life, and you start to uncover some of that in meditation practice. You start to uncover some of that by living the spiritual life. Yeah, kindness is being happy, being generous is happiness. Um, Having a sense of loving kindness and compassion for the world, that also is an experience of happiness. There is a large amount of a varieties of happiness on the Buddhist path, and please enjoy those. We're not trying to negate the realities of those happinesses. And so when we present the Dhamma, we should focus on happiness. We should focus on the kind of large number of suttas where the Buddha discusses happiness in a variety of ways. But the reason why the Buddha focuses on suffering is precisely because it is an insight. Everyone in the world already knows about happiness in a certain way. We're all searching for that, all looking for that, always trying to indulge in the various kinds of sensual happiness or whatever that we have. It is suffering that we don't really understand. It is the nature of existence moving on from life to life. That is where we are blind. That's where we need to open our eyes. And for that reason, the Buddha focuses on the blind spots of human beings. And that's kind of why that focus is the primary one in the Four Noble Truths. But in practice, we need to talk about happiness because happiness is more easy to understand. It is something that also motivates us powerfully. And of course, there is a lot of joy, a lot of happiness and gladness, etc., to be had if we practice the spiritual path in the right way. So, yes, there is suffering, but yes, there's also happiness. And getting this balance right is very important. So, uh, that is just a little bit by way of background for you in terms of how to think about the Four Noble Truths as a kind of overall framework. Now, let us go to the actual First Noble Truth, the First Noble Truth, which is Dukkha. It's just called Dukkha in the suttas. Yeah, the First Noble Truths are often they are contracted, Dukkha, Samudaya, Nirodha, and Magga, which means suffering, arising, cessation, and path. Yeah, this is kind of the contraction of the Four Noble Truths. But the First Noble Truth goes something like as follows. Yeah, Jati pi dukkha, Jara pi dukkha, Vyadi pi dukkha, Maranam pi dukkha, Apiye sampayogo dukkha, Piyehi vipayogo dukkha, Yang pichang, Nalavati tampi dukkang, Sankitena panchupadana kanda dukkha. Yeah, which means basically birth is suffering, jati, or is it birth? Maybe it isn't birth. Let's get back to that in a second. Birth is suffering, illness is suffering, old age is suffering, death is suffering, being united with things that you don't like is suffering, being separated from the things that you like is suffering, not getting what you want is suffering. In brief, the five aggregates, grasping aggregates are suffering. That's basically the First Noble Truth. Now, what is kind of really fascinating, one of the things that is really interesting about this is the first thing to note here is that how simple many of these things are, how straightforward they are. Yeah, old age is suffering. Okay, that's not very hard to understand. Illness is suffering. Yeah, we know that already. Or do we? Maybe we don't know these things already. Death is suffering. Surely we know that death is suffering. But do we really know death is suffering? Being united with what we don't like, separated, not getting what you want. It's all kind of very obvious. It's only the last part, the five aggregates of grasping, which is a bit complicated. And this is one of those beautiful things about the Dhamma, and especially about the Four Noble Truths. The first one, especially, how straightforward it is, how incredibly simple. How everyone can understand what is going on. Everyone understands these ideas. We all know them from our personal experience in our ordinary life. Yeah, so it is very easy to access. And that means that we should use these ideas right here and contemplate them, try to really understand what they mean. Because even though we understand them superficially, even though we can all relate to them in one way or another, it is also the case that we don't fully grasp what these things are. Very often it's like, yeah, yeah, I know that already. But wait a minute. If you say, yeah, yeah, I know that already, maybe you haven't contemplated enough. Maybe you haven't fully taken on board what is going on here. And this is the thing about all of these things in the sutras. The Buddha very often talks about the contemplation of old age, the contemplation of death, the contemplation of being separated from everything that is beloved and dear to you. It's a very common way of discussing the Dhamma, common way of contemplating it. In fact, the Buddha says everyone should contemplate these things, whether you are a householder or someone who has gone forth, whether you are a woman or a man. He specifically says whether you're a woman or a man in this particular one sutta. Everyone should contemplate these things because they are easy to start with because we know what they are. And we need to understand them more profoundly because when they become more profound, that is when they start to bite emotionally. You start to feel these truths. And it is feeling this truth that really matters because we are driven by feelings. Human beings are driven by emotions. If there are no feelings, there's nothing to be done. But if there are emotions, if there are feelings of positive and negative, that is what drives us in life. And so we need to understand these things at a visceral, emotional level. That's where it actually starts to make a difference. And so this is the beauty of these things. They are simple yet profound at the same time, and they are worthy of a lot of contemplation to actually make them come alive. But the other thing that is really interesting here is that the sequence starts with jati. Yeah, this word jati, I translated as birth as I started out. Now, is that a good translation or is it not a good translation there? This is kind of very fascinating. Very, very commonly, people talk about this as the right way of translating it. A couple of years ago, maybe that was a year ago now, I can't remember. I think it was last year. I was in England, and when I was in England, I went to Oxford, and I was invited to Oxford University, and then to give a short lecture to the lecturers over there. So I was going to lecture the lecturers, which is kind of funny, and it was interesting because they came, yeah, and they were quite happy because I don't know, maybe they just enjoy seeing a monk. I don't know why they came, but they came. All these lecturers came, yeah, the kind of the people who lecture in Pali and Buddhist studies and these kind of things. And so I presented a few ideas to them, and I said, well, one of the things that you know, and this is something I've been talking about for many, many years, is that maybe the idea of translating jati as birth, maybe it is not right. Maybe it should instead be translated as rebirth. And all these lecturers said, no, 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 that's a terrible idea. That's a very, very bad idea. It should absolutely be birth, and rebirth is kind of the wrong idea here. And I was very disappointed because to me, rebirth is obviously the right translation. Yeah. And I thought, well, these lecturers, maybe they are too academic or too much in their head or too much in the ivory tower or whatever. But when you understand the broader message of the Buddha, clearly rebirth is the right way to understand this. And there's a couple of reasons why that is, and it changes the whole idea of the First Noble Truth once you kind of get your head around this. And two reasons for that is that according to the Second Noble Truth, yeah, craving is the cause of suffering. According to the Third Noble Truth, we have to give up craving to end suffering. Now, jati, birth, is suffering. We want to get rid of jati. The only jati you can get rid of, the only jati you can stop is rebirth. The fact that you were born in this life, well, that's too late. You made that mistake already. Sorry. One mistake has been done, so they can't do anything about that. But all you can do anything about is future rebirth. And for that reason, it is rebirth that is really what the First Noble Truth is about. Not just that, but in the kind of Indian context in ancient India, birth always meant rebirth. Birth was always also rebirth. And so for them, when they heard the word jati, they would have heard birth and rebirth at the same time. But if you tell a person who has been raised in the Western world, yeah, in the Western cultural sphere, and you say rebirth, and you say birth, no one thinks of rebirth. Yeah, everyone just thinks of birth. And so to get the same understanding as the ancient Indians had, you have to use the word rebirth to understand what is going on. And this is really important because once you understand that this stands at the beginning of the First Noble Truth, then you understand that what the First Noble Truth really is about. It's about the future lives. It's about the grander scale of samsaric existence. Because once you talk about rebirth, you don't just talk about one birth. If there is one rebirth, there is many rebirths. There is potentially infinite number of rebirths unless we get out of this mess. And so the whole idea then of the First Noble Truth is actually to show us the round of samsara, the round of being reborn, the round of dying, and all the problems that come as part of that. That is really the purpose of the First Noble Truth. And so I say that we talk about rebirth. We should also talk about re-illness. We should talk about re-old age. We should talk about re-death. We should talk about all of these things, because that is really the idea behind this kind of movement, the going on, the fact that these things just, roll on in a sense, potentially infinitely or indefinitely, unless we do something about it. So that gives you an idea. And once you have that as an idea in your head, then coming back to what I was saying before, the idea, the meaning of dukkha, yeah, it is precisely the meaning is then the suffering of the round of existence, this broad-based, large-scale view of reality. That's kind of what is really going on here. And that's why suffering is the right way of thinking about this. So then once you have been reborn, once you kind of carry on in existence in this way, then of course you get more of the same problems. Yeah, then you get old age, you get death, you get all of these kind of things. Kind of goes again and again, and then you can start contemplating old age and death. I would really recommend you to contemplate these things a little bit. It doesn't matter how young or how old you are. Those of you are already getting on a little bit like me, well, hopefully we're going to get even a little bit older, right? We haven't got to the end of our lives yet. And so old age can still be contemplated. And for those of you who are young, it's even more powerful because it brings in the reality of existence right there when you still have when you understand something early on, you have more time to deal with it, more time to make something out of it. So contemplate these things. Death contemplation is very, very important in the Dhamma, and what it does to you, it makes you a more peaceful person because craving becomes far less. You don't think about the future in quite the same way. One of the ways that I would really recommend you to contemplate death is to read some of the near-death experience that people have had. It's very fascinating to read about those. There are some excellent books available by people who have done research in this area. And it's just amazing how powerful it is to read about someone else's near-death experience and how it draws you in. It changes those people's lives. People become really different after they had a near-death experience. They become more kind. They become less worried about material things in the world. But it is not just the people who have it who actually experience that. Even the reader, even the people who hear the stories gets affected in that way. It changes you when you hear these stories. These are ordinary people having ordinary experience. Think, wow, is that the reality? Is that what the Buddha talked about? Very often you read about rebirth in the suttas, and it doesn't really make all necessarily very powerful impact on you. But when you hear what people are going through on the ground, when you hear the real life experiences, then it is actually far more powerful, far more influential as a consequence. So read some of these stories. I would really recommend that. And then contemplate death in general, what it means to you. It makes you more peaceful. It makes you a more kind human being if you have a broader and better understanding of death. Then you have I'm going a little bit fast because there's too much to be talked about here. But then you have the idea of being separated. Starting off with being united with what you don't like, appiyehi sampayogo dukkha. And this, of course, is a very, very common experience for human beings. Yeah, every day we have to experience things that are not nice. You have things like people saying bad things to you. It happens almost every day. Yeah, I don't know how social you are, if you are a hermit or not. If you are a hermit, you might be better off. But if you have a job and you have to deal with society, it's very rare for a whole day to go by without hearing somebody saying something which isn't exactly pleasant or whatever. Yeah, this is kind of one of the things. So the body is painful. The body is an abyss of pain, and we all know that there's no end to the pain that you can have in the body. And there's just a large number of things of being associated with what is not really nice. And one of the ways of dealing with that is very often just to avoid things. Yeah, avoid the problems. Don't kind of put yourself in harm's way and try to uh, kind of deal with it by actually experiencing dukkha. I never recommend people to experience dukkha. Try to have a good life. Yeah, enjoy life. Avoid the bad things if you can. But the reality is that regardless of how much you try to avoid the dukkha of life, there will always be a residue of dukkha available, always. And that residue we have to bear with. And so understanding the nature of dukkha in the world, understanding the nature of the body, understanding the nature of society and human beings. Yeah, there are human beings in the world they have their own problems. Yeah, they have their own issues in life. And of course, sometimes they're going to say bad things, and those bad things may hurt you. It's like the hurt of another being gets transferred to you because they speak in an unpleasant way. But when you understand that this is the nature of life, you don't take it so seriously anymore. Not only don't you take it so seriously, but you start to have more compassion. Yeah, one of the questions that people were talking about or asking about for this particular talk today was the idea of compassion. That is a very simple way of kind of having compassion in the world, which solves so many problems for you. If you hear someone saying something negative or something bad, the right response to those negative words is almost always compassion, because it is coming from somewhere painful, coming from somewhere difficult. And the person in front of you, they may seem like they are very together. They may seem like they are just kind of unloading on you, yeah, by being nasty or whatever. But it is never like that. It is never about you. It is always about the suffering of the other person. And if you think about these things in the right way, you solve two things right away. First of all, you don't get upset by the other person's wrong, bad speech. You don't worry so much about that. And at the same time, you develop compassion in the world. So you solve a lot of problems by thinking of the problems of the world in this way. Don't buy into it. Don't allow the world to kind of upset you through this kind of bad speech. Turn around, turn it all around, make an opportunity for compassion instead. So much of life is like that. If we take all the opportunities there is for compassion when people say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, it is an enormous amount. And our whole attitude to other people changes fundamentally as a consequence. So another question that people talked about today, or in that, when they were asked about what to talk about, was the idea of climate change. How should we think about climate change? Is it compatible to be a Buddhist, a practitioner of the Dhamma? Is that compatible with activism, for example, if you want to do something in the world about climate change? And again, we're now talking about the First Noble Truth. And one of the right ways of thinking about climate change is to think of it as belonging to the First Noble Truth. Yeah, it is being united with what is displeasing. We're talking right now about appiyehi sampayogo, being united with what is not nice. Well, knowing about climate change or the wars in the world, yeah, in Ukraine, in Gaza, or whatever, all of these things are really about the First Noble Truth. And so that is kind of the most important thing. Because if you understand this, then you understand that actually it is a little bit inevitable. Of course, there is going to be wars in the world. Of course, there's going to be climate change. And if it isn't climate change, it's going to be something else. There's always going to be something that goes wrong because that is the nature of this world. And so, for me, the main insight about climate change is not so much what we should do about it, but what we should learn from it, what we should learn about the nature of the world, and how we too will get caught up in these problems sooner or later. Right now, the war in Ukraine is confined to a small area. But, tomorrow, maybe there will be a war in Perth. I live in Perth. I don't know if there's going to be a war in Perth. We are a bit far away, but you never know. And so these are just warning signs. These things are not things to be too concerned about because we are on the right path anyway, practicing in a good way. And any person who practices in a good way always has a good future. But these are ways to wake us up and to empower our spiritual path because we understand what really is at stake, the problems that are around us. So is activism for climate change, is it compatible with being a Buddhist? I would say it depends a little bit on how you do it. For some people, activism is not really a solution anyway. Some people don't want to be activists. Some people want to be activists. So it's really up to you how you want to live your life. But yes, you can, of course, be an activist and also be a Buddhist. But it's important that you don't allow the activism to become the primary purpose. The primary purpose should be the Dhamma. The activism should be a moral choice that you make within the confines of the Dhamma. The larger picture should always be the Dhamma. You should do the activism for the right reason. You should do it because out of compassion, because you want to create a better world, because you want to do something that makes a better society or whatever. And when you do it for that reason, it can become, if you do it in the right way, a factor of the path, something that actually enables mindfulness, enables meditation, enables all of these positive consequences. Then you're doing the activism right. But don't allow the activism to take over your life. Don't allow the activism to make you angry and bitter. Don't allow the activism to make you disappointed. Very easy to become disappointed. Yeah, you try your very best and still nothing happens. Still things get worse. Okay, actually, I'm a Buddhist. I expected that. I did the activism because it was right, not because it would necessarily give results. Might give results, it might not. Who knows what the future holds? And so, this way, you can integrate some of these things into your understanding of the First Noble Truth, and thereby you can make it more valuable for you. Um, Let us move on a little bit. Then we have the idea of being separated from what you love in the world. Yeah, this is kind of very powerful and very difficult thing for human beings. This is about the people who are closest to us, who mean the most to us, the death and dying and illness of people who are very important. How do we deal with that? And the answer is, first of all, to contemplate it, to understand that this is the nature of things. The Buddha says elsewhere, as I mentioned before, that everything that is dear and beloved to us must become otherwise, must become separated from us. And so when you understand that this is the nature of reality, you don't hold on quite as much as you maybe did before. You let go a little bit because you understand the underlying problem. Yeah. Now, I want to make the point that it is important not to think that the right approach to overcome this is not to have anyone to love or anyone to have affection for towards in life. That is not the right way. Sometimes you find Buddhists who become these cold people and they don't really deal with anyone and they become emotionally aloof and they become kind of separated from everyone around them and they become slightly it can become a bit disturbing to see people like that, yeah, who don't have any loose kind of connection with people. And that is not the right way of doing things. It is not that we should not have any affection or love for the people around us. Absolutely, we should. Otherwise, we become emotionally stunted people. We don't want to be emotionally stunted. We want to have full emotional lives. In fact, the Dhamma is precisely about one of the aspects of the Dhamma is about having a full emotional life. As the way to overcome the problem of being separated from the people you love and who are dear to you is not by becoming emotionally aloof, but by developing those emotions even further. Yeah, instead of just having affection for a few people, you develop the metta, you develop the karuna, the loving kindness, the compassion, and you start encompassing everyone in the world. And as you encompass more and more people, and these emotions become more powerful, it is like your mind is rising in a sense. Your mind is becoming more bright, more light, more beautiful. The attachments are going because you are doing a more large scale kind of contemplation, a more large scale uh, compassion or affection for the whole world. And that means that the attachments are slowly disappearing all by themselves as a consequence. And so instead of becoming aloof and becoming separated in a bad way, we make this into some kind of universal thing instead. And eventually, as you universalize the idea of metta and compassion, there comes a point when you don't have any attachments anymore, because it is no longer about specific people. It is now about a universal feeling and experience of things. So this is one way of thinking about the idea of overcoming the danger, that we have when we are too attached to people, and making something out of that, which is far more positive. In fact, even in the monastic community, you're supposed to have affection. It says in the sutras, in the Vinaya, that you should have affection for your teacher, for example. Yeah, so that is kind of one of the qualities that you are supposed to have. And if you haven't got affection for your teacher, maybe you should find another one. And so everyone in our monastery, I guess we are trying to have affection towards Ajahn Brahm. And if we don't have affection for Ajahn Brahm, well, then maybe Ajahn Brahm has to tell us to leave. So now, sorry, you have to go now because you haven't got any affection for me, you have no faith. So it's a problem. So affection is even part of the idea in the monastic community now. So that is just very briefly about the idea of not being separated from what is beloved and dear to you. Finally, the very last one is not getting what you want. I'm not going to talk about the five khandhas because that is too profound for this kind of introductory talk, but a little bit about the idea of not getting what you want. Because this is life, right? Not getting what you want. Sometimes you might get what you want, but sometimes you don't. And it's like inherent. It's like woven into the fabric of our existence, the idea that we don't always get what we want. And it is in so many different areas of life that we don't get what we want. We don't get what we want in our love life. We don't get what we want in our professional life. We don't get what we want in our spiritual life. I want good meditation, and you can't have it because you want it too much. And so it is kind of part of samsaric existence. And it is especially part of the sensual realm. The sensual realm that we live in as human beings is a realm where we share the external world with other people. And because we share the external world with others, there is always competition. There's always kind of winners and losers in a world where there is competition. And because there is competition and there's winners and losers, it means that sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. And so there will always be disappointment. Never are we always going to get what we want. It's kind of obvious from this existence that we have. And so what are we going to do about this? How can we kind of get out of all of this problem of wanting? And again, the idea is a little bit similar to what I was saying before. As you develop your mind, as you kind of move out of that sensory existence, as you move away from the sensual pleasures of the world, and you move on to the pleasures of the Dhamma, the pleasures of meditation instead, you find your refuge inside. You find your happiness more and more within rather than outside. And if you find the happiness within rather than outside, well, that is a place where you are no longer sharing the world with other people. This is your private world. And because it is your private world, it doesn't suffer from the same deficiencies as you find in the world outside. Yeah, it is especially in the world outside where we cannot get what we want because we are sharing it with 7 billion other people and various animals and maybe various invisible beings and what have you that is kind of all out there trying to kind of get hold of the same things. But the inner world is where we find that refuge. And the more you build up that inner world, the more you build up the happiness within, the more the external world doesn't bother you anymore. Until the point comes, as I was mentioning before, where you do have a sense of metta, of compassion, maybe a state of samadhi in your meditation or whatever it might be, where the world outside is completely gone. And that is where you find a complete refuge within doing that. But it is not just, the problem is not just that we don't get what we want. Another very interesting problem about this idea of wanting is that very often we don't really know what we should want. Very often we want all these stupid things. Yeah, have you ever wanted any stupid things in your life? I have wanted so many stupid things in my life. And in retrospect, when I look back upon my life, I think, why on earth did I even want those things in the first place? And the deeper you go into the Dhamma, you start to understand that those things that are really worthwhile wanting are actually very different from the things that you have been wanting all along when you were still blinded by delusion, all of these kind of things. And so we don't know. We are blind in the world. We don't know what is going on. And so to be able to even find out what is worthwhile wanting, what we have to do is to take away some of the blinders, some of the things that blind us to reality. And the main things that blind us to reality are our defilements. This is the greed, hatred, delusion, or desire, ill will, and confusion, if you like. And these things, they make us impossible for us to really understand what is really happiness and what is suffering in the world. They make it impossible for us to understand that a deep state of meditation is far more satisfactory than anything you can ever find in the world. Removing these defilements make it possible to understand that there is an insight, an understanding of reality that leads to the very, very highest kind of happiness of all. And this is kind of very fascinating from so many different points of view. One of the points of view this is very fascinating from is the whole debate about free will. Because the whole debate about free will is often, well, do you have free will? And I would say, I don't know, probably in one sense you don't, in another sense maybe you do. But the point is that what are you choosing from anyway? You're choosing one stupid thing or another stupid thing. What's the point of having free will if all you're choosing is stupid things anyway? And so that free will is a very poor kind of free will. It is a free will that doesn't really actually have any power. It can't do very much for you. Far more important is to free the will from delusion, free the will from greed, free the will from hatred, because then it opens up your mind to those things that actually are really worthwhile wanting. Yeah, and that is kind of the interesting thing. Knowing what to want, knowing what to desire, knowing where to lean your mind towards. That is the real freedom. And that is where the will actually starts to have real meaning. And so the freedom of the will debate in the ordinary world, to me, is very shallow. It doesn't really have many consequences to it. Buddhist free will is of a very different kind. It means the eliminating of defilements to allow you to make meaningful choices in your life. That is really what that is about. And so this is kind of the idea of not getting what you want is suffering. Yeah, it is. First of all, it is about understanding, going beyond the ordinary wants of life because they are silly, and then understanding also what is truly worthwhile wanting. And when you understand what is truly worthwhile wanting, then ultimately you go beyond all of these kind of problems that we have. We're talking about old age, about illness, about death, about being associated with the unlike, all of these kind of things. And the true happiness at the very core of the Buddhist path is the happiness that eliminates all of those problems. Why? Because you have wanted the thing that leads to the end of wanting. And that end of wanting is the freedom of the path. Okay, so that is my little Dhamma talk to you all on the First Noble Truth. And so there you are. So if you would like to ask some questions or have any comments, or you would like to share anything in particular from your life or whatever, please feel free to do so.